Dear students, welcome to this comprehensive lecture on one of the most dynamic aspects of organizational life, conflict and resolution. In any setting where people gather to achieve a common goal, differences are bound to arise. Conflict is not merely an occasional hurdle, it is a basic fact of life within groups and organizations. It is an aspect of how organizations function every single day. Because organizations consist of individuals with different views, personalities, and interests, they often find themselves competing for limited resources. Have you ever wondered why even the best managed team experience friction? It is because conflict is an inescapable consequence of human interaction and interdependence. Today, we will explore why conflicts happen, how it affects productivity, and most importantly, how we can manage it to benefit the organizations. We will move beyond the idea that conflict is always bad and look at how it can actually spark creativity and change. Before we dive into the details, let us look at what we aim to achieve by the end of this session. First, we will define the term conflict and understand its nature as a dynamic process. Second, we will distinguish between the functional and dysfunctional views of conflict. Moving from classical theories to modern perspective. Third, we will analyze the various levels of conflict, including individual, group, and organizational levels. Fourth, we will examine specific types of goal and role conflicts that individuals face. Fifth, we will identify the factors that lead to interpersonal and intergroup differences. Finally, we will master the strategies and actions used by managers to resolve the conflicts, ranging from structural changes to specific negotiation styles like compromising and problem solving. This roadmap will help us navigate the complex landscape of organizational behavior. To begin, we must recognize that conflict is part and parcel of every part of human life. Organizations are not just structures, they are collections of people with divergent perception, values, and status. Think about it. Groups within a company often have competing views on how to use the limited money or equipment available. This makes conflict an inevitable result of social interactions. The term conflict itself has many meanings. At its simplest level, it refers to a state of mind where a person is stuck, unable to decide between two paths. In a broader sense, it represents a disagreement or a showdown between two parties. And effective managers must understand these origins. While we often think of conflict as something to be avoided, the reality is that it can be beneficial if handled correctly. However, if left unresolved, it consumes time and energy that should be spent on organizational goals. Therefore, the management of conflict is an essential part of maintaining sound human relations. What do we really mean when we say someone is in conflict? It is often described as a state of mind where people are in a dilemma. They spend their energy weighing the pros and cons of a situation, but still feel unable to make a decision. Experts like March and Simon suggest that conflict is a breakdown in the standard mechanism of decision making. It occurs when two opposite forces have equal power and the individual is caught in the middle. Beyond the individual mind, conflict is also a dynamic process. It doesn't just happen once, it unfolds in a sequence of episodes. Each episode we start with certain conditions that have conflict potential. Even if the parties are not hostile yet, the outcome of one conflict episode leaves an aftermath that affects the next one. This means that if a small disagreement is handled poorly today, it creates a foundation for a much larger argument tomorrow. This highlights why we must view conflict as an evolving relationship rather than a single event. To summarize our first section, conflict is an inescapable and inevitable part of organizational life due to the diversity of human views and limited resources. We defined it both as a mental dilemma and a breakdown in decision making processes. We also noted that conflict is dynamic, occurring in episodes where the aftermath of one affects the next. Now, let me ask you a rhetorical question. Is conflict always a sign of a broken organization? You might be tempted to say yes, but as we are about to see, the answer is more complex. Let us move forward to examine how our views on conflict have changed over time. Historically, management experts had a very negative view of conflict. Classicists viewed it as an organizational abnormality. To them, it was a dangerous process that brought about nothing but anger, confusion, and lack of cooperation. They believed that because conflict disrupts the smooth functioning of a company, it is always bad and must be eliminated at all cost. Behaviorists also shared this jaundiced or biased view for a long time. They felt that a healthy organizations should be a place of perfect harmony. In this traditional mindset, if there was a conflict, it means that the management has failed in some way. The goal was simple: find the conflict and stop it immediately. However, as organizations become more complex, we realized that this elimination at all cost approach was not only impossible but also potentially harmful to growth. Modern view offers a much more balanced perspective. Today, we recognize that conflict is a social phenomenon that is structural to any organization. It is not always troublesome. In fact, it should often be welcomed. This shift in thinking suggests that a certain optimum level of conflicts and stress is actually necessary for progress and productivity. Instead of trying to wipe out every disagreement, modern management philosophy aims to create an atmosphere where conflict can be directed to play a positive role. We now categorize conflict into two types: functional and dysfunctional. Functional conflict supports the goal of the group and improves performance, while dysfunctional conflict hinders it. So the question is no longer how do we stop conflict, but rather how do we use it to make us better. Let's look at why conflict can be good. First, it provides a chance for introspection. It forces us to take a second look at our existing policies or behaviors and think more deeply about them. Second, it can actually increase cohesion. Have you noticed how a group of people often put aside their internal differences when they have to compete against another group? This common enemy effect brings people close together and creates unity. Third, conflicts foster creativity and innovation. It prevents a company from becoming a stagnant. When ideas clash, it stimulates curiosity and leads to more imaginative solutions to problems. Fourth, it is a major stimulant for a change. A conflict often points out a flaw in the system that needs fixing. Finally, it acts as a release for tension. It brings long-standing hidden problems to the surface so they can finally be dealt with. Without this release, a small frustration can build up until they cause total breakdown. Of course, we cannot ignore the dark side of conflict. When conflict becomes destructive, it creates significant problems. The most immediate effect is stress. It generates feelings of anxiety, guilt, and hostility, which harm the mental health of employees. Instead of a cooperative environment, a climate of distrust develops where people are more interested in seeing their rivals fail than in helping the company succeed. Another dreadful effect is the diversion of energy. Think of all the time wasted when employees are busy planning strategies for a showdown instead of working on their actual task. This leads to instability and chaos, breaking down the communication channels that keeps an organization running. In extreme cases, it can even lead to negative motivation, where people management start to treat any disagreement as disloyalty and responds with harassment or exploitation. When this happens, production goes down and labor turnover goes up. To recap this section, we have moved from the classical view that all conflict is bad to a modern understanding that it can be functional. Positive conflict encourages creativity, unity, and change, while negative conflict leads to stress, wasted energy, and organizational chaos. Here is a question for you to reflect on. If conflict is necessary for progress, why do most people still feel uncomfortable when it happens? The answer lies in the fact that we often lack the tools to move conflict from a dysfunctional state to a functional one. Now that we understand the why, let's look at the different levels where this conflict occurs. Conflict doesn't just happen in one place. It exists at three distinct levels within the hierarchy of an organization. First, we have the individual level, which is where most conflicts begin. This involves the internal struggles of a single person or the friction between two people. Second is the group level, which looks at how individuals interact within their internal teams or how different teams clash with each other. Finally, we have the organizational level. This can involve conflict within the entire company structure or between the company and outside entities like the government or other businesses. Understanding these levels is crucial because a conflict at the individual level can quickly bubble up and affect the entire organization if it is not addressed. Let's start by looking closely at the internal world of the individual. Intra-individual conflict occurs within a person. We all have needs, and when those needs are not met, or when they clash with what our jobs requires, we feel frustrated. This internal tug of war can turn an employee into an inert instrument, someone who just shows up but has no creativity or drive. There are two primary types of internal conflict: goal conflict and role conflict. Goal conflict happens when a person has to choose between different outcomes. Role conflict happens when the expectations placed on a person are inconsistent. Because we all play multiple roles as employee, parent, friends, and leaders, it is very common for these roles to push us in different directions at the same time. Let's break down goal conflict into three specific scenarios. First, there is a approach conflict. This is when you have to choose between two equally attractive goals that are mutually exclusive. For example, you are offered two great jobs at the same time. While this causes some stress, it is the nicest kind of conflict to have because both options are positive. Second is approach avoidance conflict. This is much more complex. It happens when a single goal has both positive and negative features. Think of a promotion that comes with a much higher salary but requires you to move a city you dislike. You are attracted to the money but repelled by the location. This is very common source of stress in organizational behavior. Finally, there is avoidance conflict, where you must choose between the two evils. An employee might hate their current job but be equally afraid of being unemployed. They are stuck between two negative options, often leading to a complete freeze in decision making. Now, let's turn to role conflict. In an organization, everyone is expected to behave in a certain way based on their job title. Conflict arises when these expectations don't match your own values or when people expect different things from you. This is essentially a result of divergent role expectations. Imagine a manager who is told by the CEO to cut costs but is also told by the employees that they need better equipment to do their jobs. The manager is caught in the middle because there is no way to satisfy one group without upsetting the other. A role conflict exists. This tension can be incredibly draining as the person feels they are failing someone no matter what they do. There are four ways role conflict specifically shows up. First is intrasender conflict, where one person gives you incompatible instruction. For example, a librarian is told to buy rare books but only from approved seller who don't actually have those books. Second is intersender conflict, where different people send different messages. A building contractor might be told by an architect to do one thing while the labor union say another. Third is inter-role conflict. This happens when you play different roles at once. A professor might find it hard to be both a friendly developer of a student's talent and a strict judge who has to fail that same student. Finally, there is person role conflict. This is the most personal type. It happens when your job requires you to do something that goes against your basic value or attitudes. If you are a naturally honest person but your job requires you to bend the truth to make a sale, you will experience a deep internal conflict. Why does role conflict happens more to some people than others? Three main factors are at play. The first is role ambiguity. This is when your job description is vague. If you don't know exactly what you are supposed to do, you can't do it properly, which leads to stress. The second is your organizational position. People in middle management or line staff roles often experience the most conflict because they are the bridge between two different groups, such as the workers and the executives. The third factor is personal characteristics. Not everyone reacts to conflict the same way. Researchers like Kahn found that people who are more introverted, emotionally sensitive, or rigid in their thinking tend to feel the strain of conflict much more intensely. A person's need for career achievement can also make them more susceptible to feeling the weight of this role's pressures. To recap, in this first lecture on conflict and resolution, we focused primarily on the individual level of conflict, especially intra-individual struggles. We examined the three major types of goal conflict and the four types of role conflicts that individuals experience within organizations. We also understood how factors such as role ambiguity, unclear expectations, and personal sensitivity can intensify these internal tensions. Now, let me ask you a rhetorical question. Can we ever completely eliminate role conflict? Realistically, the answer is no. As multidimensional human being performing multiple roles, some level of conflict is inevitable. However, effective management can certainly minimize its negative impact through clear job description, structured communication, and role clarity. With this foundation, we are now ready to move from the internal dimensions of conflict to the external dimensions. In the next lecture, we will explore interpersonal group and organizational level of conflict. More importantly, we will study the systematic conflict management process and understand the critical managerial role in transforming conflict into constructive outcome such as better coordination, improved decision making, and organizational growth. Thank you all for your attentive participation and interest in today's discussion. I hope this session has helped you gain a clear understanding of the conflict and resolution. Once again, thank you for your time and attention.